My name is Emily Carter, and I was 37 years old the day I buried the strongest woman I have ever known. Her name was Margaret Carter. She wasn't famous. She never owned a fancy car. She never traveled the world. But she built a life with two worn-out hands and a heart that never stopped giving. At her funeral, every pew inside the little white church outside Lexington, Kentucky was full. Neighbors came. Former students came. Veterans she cooked meals for came. The mailman cried. Even the veterinarian who had treated our horses for 20 years stood in the back with his hat pressed against his chest. But two seats in the front row stayed empty. They had little white name cards on them. Daniel Carter, Ryan Carter, my brothers, Mom's sons. They never came. Not to say goodbye, not to carry her casket, not even to stand beside the woman who had sacrificed everything so they could have better lives. At exactly 10:18 that morning, while our pastor was reading Psalm 23, my phone vibrated. I ignored it. Nothing mattered except my mother. After the service ended, I finally looked down. It wasn't a missed call. It wasn't a text. It was a voicemail. From my mother. The timestamp read today, 10:17 a.m., 1 minute earlier. My blood turned cold, because my mother had been dead for 9 days. To understand why that voicemail changed everything, you first have to understand who Margaret Carter really was. My father died in a farming accident when I was 14. One second he was repairing a tractor. The next, our entire world disappeared beneath 4 tons of steel. Mom never cried where we could see her. Instead, the morning after the funeral, she woke up before sunrise, pulled on Dad's old work gloves, walked into the barn, and started feeding the horses. Life didn't pause because her heart was broken. Bills still arrived. Animals still needed food. The farm still demanded work. She carried all of it herself. Daniel was already 18. Ryan was 16. I was only 14. The boys hated farm life. They couldn't wait to leave. Daniel earned a business degree and moved to Chicago. Ryan followed opportunity to Dallas, where he opened a luxury car dealership. At first, they promised to visit every month, then every holiday, then every summer. Eventually, birthdays became phone calls. Christmas became text messages. Mom always defended them. They're building careers, she'd tell me. They'll come home when life slows down. Life never slowed down. Years passed. Grandchildren were born. Businesses grew. Vacation photos covered their social media pages. Meanwhile, Mom still drove the same 20-year-old pickup truck, still patched holes in the barn roof herself, still baked apple pies every Sunday even when nobody came to eat them. Except me. I never left Kentucky. People sometimes asked why. The answer was simple. Someone had to stay. I became an accountant in town. The office was only 20 minutes from the farm. Every evening after work, I'd drive down the familiar gravel road. We'd eat dinner together, watch old Western movies, drink sweet tea on the porch. She never asked me to stay. I simply couldn't imagine leaving her alone. Then came the diagnosis. Stage 4 ovarian cancer. The doctor explained treatment options with careful words. Mom listened quietly. Then she asked only one question. Will I still be able to walk my horses? The doctor smiled sadly. For a while. She nodded. Then that's enough. Chemo started the following week. Her beautiful silver hair slowly disappeared. Her hands became thinner. Walking across the yard exhausted her. Still, she apologized every time I helped her. I'm slowing you down, she'd whisper. No, I'd tell her. You spent 30 years carrying me. Now it's my turn. Every Tuesday, I drove her to the cancer center. Every Thursday, I picked up prescriptions. Every Saturday, we sat on the porch watching sunsets. Neither of us wanted to admit might be our last together. Daniel visited once. For 38 minutes. Most of that time was spent answering work emails. Ryan stayed even less. He took selfies with Mom for Facebook. Caption: Nothing stronger than family. He left before dinner. Mom smiled after he drove away. They're busy. I smiled too. But inside, something hurt. 6 months before she died. Something changed. She asked me to help clean the attic. We spent hours opening dusty boxes, old photographs, Dad's military medals, yellowed newspaper clippings, broken Christmas ornaments. Near sunset, she found a small red wooden box. She held it for a long time, longer than seemed normal. Finally, she looked at me. If anything ever happens to me, I interrupted immediately. Don't. She smiled gently. Emily, we all leave someday. She handed me the box. I want you to promise me something. What? When the time comes, don't let guilt make your decisions. I laughed nervously. What does that even mean? She simply shook her head. You'll understand later. I tried opening the box. It was locked. She took it back. Not yet. I never saw it again. At least, not while she was alive. The last week was harder. Cancer doesn't negotiate. It takes, little by little, until there isn't much left to fight with. She stopped eating, stopped walking, stopped pretending she wasn't afraid. One rainy evening, I sat beside her hospital bed at home. Lightning flashed outside. She reached for my hand. Emily, I'm scared. It was the first time she'd admitted it. I squeezed her fingers. So am I. She smiled weakly. You always tell the truth. You taught me. After several quiet minutes, she whispered, Promise me one more thing. Anything. No matter what your brothers say after I'm gone. Listen carefully before believing them. I frowned. What do you mean? She closed her eyes. I've made arrangements. What arrangements? Instead of answering, she fell asleep. It would be the last real conversation we ever had. 3 days later, at 4:42 in the morning, she quietly took her final breath. I was holding her hand. The nurse was adjusting medication. Outside, the first birds of spring had begun singing. For a strange moment, everything became perfectly still. I kept waiting for another breath, another heartbeat, another chance to say one more thing. It never came. Daniel couldn't arrive until 2 days later. Ryan said flights were expensive. Neither one helped plan the funeral. Neither one asked about medical bills. Neither one wanted to sort through Mom's paperwork. But both of them asked the exact same question. So, what's happening with the farm? Not, how are you? Not, was Mom in pain? Just, the farm. I should have recognized that question for what it really was. Instead, I assumed grief affects everyone differently. I wanted to believe they still loved her. I wanted to believe there was something left worth saving. I had no idea. My mother had already seen through them, and she had left behind something that would force the truth into daylight. After the funeral ended, people hugged me for nearly an hour. They shared stories. They laughed through tears. They told me how Mom had secretly paid electric bills for struggling neighbors, how she baked birthday cakes for children whose parents couldn't afford them, how she anonymously donated winter coats every Christmas. I realized, even after 37 years as her daughter, I still hadn't known all the good she'd done. Eventually, everyone left. The cemetery grew quiet. I stood alone beside fresh earth. I hope I made you proud, I whispered. The wind moved gently through the oak trees. For just a second, it almost felt like she answered. When I finally reached my truck, my phone buzzed. Voicemail. Unknown delivery time. Sender. Margaret Carter. Hands trembling. I pressed play. Static filled the speaker. Then, my mother's weak voice. Soft, barely above a whisper. Emily. A long pause. If you're hearing this. Another pause. They found it before I wanted them to. My heart stopped. Then came one final sentence. Don't let them sell the farmhouse. Click. Silence. I stared at the screen for nearly a full minute. There was no explanation. No goodbye. No I love you. Just that warning. Then another notification appeared. My brothers had already listed the Carter family farm online. Less than 2 hours after our mother's funeral ended. And at that exact moment, I remembered the locked red wooden box she had hidden in the attic. The one she had told me not to open. The one that had suddenly disappeared. Something inside that farmhouse was worth far more than the land itself. I didn't drive home. Not after hearing my mother's voice. Not after seeing the online listing for the farmhouse. Instead, I turned the truck around and headed straight back toward the old property. The sun was already dropping behind the Kentucky hills, turning the fields golden. For 30 years, that road had always felt like home. That evening, it felt like a race. Every mile, I kept replaying the voicemail. If you're hearing this, they found it before I wanted them to. Who was they? What had they found? And why was she so desperate to stop the sale? When I pulled into the driveway, I froze. 2 black SUVs were parked outside the barn. The front door stood wide open. Voices echoed through the house. Loud voices. Angry voices. Daniel, Ryan, and 2 men I didn't recognize. One wore a tailored gray suit. The other carried a clipboard. A real estate appraiser? They hadn't even waited until after the funeral. They were already pricing our mother's life. I stepped inside. Daniel looked up first. There you are. His smile disappeared when he saw my face. Ryan barely glanced at me. We're meeting with the realtor. I looked around the living room. Mom's favorite rocking chair had already been moved. Family photographs were stacked in cardboard boxes. The quilt she'd sewn by hand lay folded on the floor. It looked less like a home and more like an estate sale. You couldn't wait one day? I asked quietly. Daniel sighed. Emily, be realistic. Mom's gone. The farm costs money. We're just handling business. Business. That word hit harder than I expected. This wasn't business. This was our mother's life. The realtor introduced himself politely. I'll just need about an hour to finish measurements. I nodded, then looked at my brothers. I need to search the attic. Ryan laughed. For what? A memory? I ignored him. I'm looking for something Mom left. Daniel crossed his arms. If it's valuable, it belongs to all 3 of us. Something about the way he said valuable made my stomach tighten. They were expecting money, not memories. I climbed the narrow attic stairs alone. Dust floated through beams of evening sunlight. Everything looked exactly as we'd left it months earlier. Old trunks, Christmas decorations, Dad's fishing gear, the rocking horse Grandpa built. But the corner where the little red wooden box had been was empty. Completely empty. I searched every shelf, every cabinet, every storage bin. Nothing. Someone had already taken it. Footsteps creaked behind me. Ryan, you looking for this? He held the red wooden box casually in one hand. My heart jumped. Where did you get it? It was in Mom's bedroom closet. He tossed it toward me. I barely caught it. The lock was still closed. So open it. I can't. Ryan shrugged. Then it can't be important. He turned to leave. Just before reaching the stairs, he smiled. You know, Daniel thinks Mom had hidden cash somewhere. I looked up sharply. What? He laughed. Old people always hide money. Then he disappeared downstairs. His words stayed with me. Cash. Why would they assume that? Unless someone had told them. Back in Mom's bedroom. I searched for the tiny brass key. I remembered seeing it years ago hanging inside her jewelry box. The jewelry box sat exactly where it always had. Inside, the key was gone. So was every piece of jewelry except one silver wedding band. Dad's. Nothing else. My brothers had searched this room before I arrived. I carried the locked box home. Sam met me at the front door. One look at my face told him everything. No luck? I placed the box on our kitchen table. It's locked. He turned it over carefully. Maybe your mother wanted you to break it open. I don't think so. Mom never damaged things she loved. There had to be another way. Sam examined the bottom, then smiled. Emily, look. Scratched into the wood were tiny initials. W.H. I frowned. Not Mom's initials, not Dad's. Then it hit me. Walter Hughes, the retired carpenter who had repaired half the barns in Fayette County. Mom had known him for 40 years. If anyone built this box, it was Walter. The next morning, I drove straight to Walter's workshop. He was 82 now. Still working. Still smelling like fresh-cut oak. When he saw the box, he smiled sadly. I haven't seen this in years. You built it? He nodded. For your mama. She asked for something nobody could open without knowing the trick. He flipped the box upside down, pressed one corner, then another. A hidden panel slid sideways. Inside, a tiny brass key. My mother had hidden the key inside the box itself. Walter smiled. She always said, if someone tries forcing it open, they don't deserve what's inside. My hands shook as I unlocked it. Inside wasn't cash, or jewelry, or property deeds. Just three things. A sealed envelope, an old leather journal, and a folded county map. Walter's smile disappeared. He stared at the journal. I remember that. What is it? He looked toward the window. It's why your mother asked me to build the box. What do you mean? He hesitated, then quietly said, Emily. Before she died, your mother came here. She was already sick. Very sick. She told me, if my children ever start fighting over money, it means they never understood what this farm really is. My throat tightened. What is it? Walter looked directly into my eyes. I promised I'd never tell. But I can tell you this. Everything you're looking for started long before you were born. I waited until I got home before opening the envelope. It was addressed in Mom's handwriting. For Emily only. Inside was a single handwritten letter. My sweet girl, if you're reading this, then I was right. Your brothers didn't come home for me. They came home for what they believed was buried beneath this land. They've believed that lie for almost 20 years. Don't hate them. They were told that story by someone I trusted. The truth is inside my journal. Read every page. Don't skip ahead. And whatever happens, don't let anyone dig beneath the old red barn until you've finished reading. Love, Mom. My hands became ice cold. Buried beneath the old red barn, I unfolded the county map. A bright red circle surrounded one place. The barn. Exactly where I'd played as a child. Exactly where my brothers had parked their SUVs that morning. Then my phone rang. Unknown number. I answered. A man's voice spoke quietly. Miss Carter? Yes? My name is Deputy Mason. I'm sorry to bother you, but someone reported suspicious activity at your mother's property tonight. What kind of activity? A long pause. Someone brought in excavation equipment. They've already started digging under the barn. The drive back to the farmhouse felt endless. Deputy Mason had told me to come if I wanted to be present before they stopped the work. My heart pounded harder with every mile. Mom's letter echoed inside my head. Don't let anyone dig beneath the old red barn until you've finished reading. Someone had ignored her final wish, and I already knew who. As I turned onto the gravel road, bright floodlights lit up the property. The peaceful farm I had grown up on looked like a construction site. A yellow excavator sat beside the barn. Fresh dirt had been piled into huge mounds. The ground where I'd learned to ride horses, where Dad had taught us to plant tomatoes, had been ripped apart. Deputy Mason walked toward me. I'm glad you came. He nodded toward the excavation. They showed paperwork claiming they're co-owners of the property. Daniel, Ryan, they were standing near the machine, arguing with a man holding blueprints. When Daniel saw me, he frowned. You shouldn't be here. I looked past him at the enormous hole. What are you looking for? Ryan answered without hesitation. What Mom hid. His confidence startled me. He didn't say if she hid something. He said what she hid, as though he already knew. The deputy stepped between us. I've stopped further digging until ownership issues are clarified. Daniel forced a smile. Officer, this is just a misunderstanding. Our mother always told us there was something valuable buried here. I turned slowly toward him. Mom told you that? He looked away. No. Ryan spoke instead. Dad did. My breath caught. Our father? Ryan nodded. When we were teenagers. He said Grandpa buried a fortune somewhere on this property. A fortune? Ryan shrugged. Gold. Cash. Something valuable. He said Mom always knew where. I stared at them. Our father had died 23 years earlier. He had never mentioned buried treasure to me. Not once. Deputy Mason ordered everyone off the property for the night. As the equipment rolled away, I couldn't stop staring at the damaged ground. My brothers weren't grieving. They were hunting. But for what? Back home, I placed Mom's leather journal on the kitchen table. Sam sat beside me. You ready? I nodded. Slowly, I opened the first page. Written neatly in blue ink were the words, April 12th, 1994. I frowned. That was almost 32 years ago. Long before Mom became sick. Long before Dad died. The first entry read, Thomas asked me again today if I believed the story. Thomas, my father? He says his father hid enough money beneath the barn to change our lives forever. I told him stories become dangerous when people love money more than truth. I looked at Sam. So Dad believed it too. He nodded quietly. I kept reading. The next several entries described arguments between my parents. Dad wanted to tear apart the old barn. Mom refused. She wrote, That barn isn't hiding treasure. It's hiding history. History? Not money? I turned another page. Tucked between two journal pages was an old newspaper clipping. The headline read, Local bank robbed, $800,000 still missing. The date, 6 years before the journal began. I read every word. Masked robbers had stolen nearly $800,000. Police never recovered it. Rumors spread across the county that the thieves buried the money, somewhere before fleeing. One rumor claimed it had been hidden near farmland outside Lexington, near our road. My pulse quickened. Was this where the legend started? Mom's next journal entry answered the question. The whole county believes the robbery money is buried under our barn. It isn't. But the lie refuses to die. I leaned back. So that's it. Sam nodded. Your brothers have spent years chasing a rumor. Maybe, but something still didn't fit. If it was only a rumor, why had Mom begged me to stop them from digging? I continued reading. About halfway through the journal. The handwriting changed. The letters became shaky. More hurried. One paragraph made my stomach tighten. Today I discovered someone has been searching the property while we're asleep. The barn door was open. Fresh footprints surrounded the foundation. Thomas thinks teenagers are playing games. I know better. I looked toward Sam. This wasn't imagination. No. He agreed. Someone really believed there was something here. Then, a folded photograph slipped from between the pages. I picked it up carefully. It showed my parents standing beside the barn. Dad was smiling. Mom wasn't. Behind them, barely visible, stood another man, half hidden by the barn door. Only part of his face could be seen. Someone had circled him in red ink. On the back, Mom had written only 4 words. Never trust Richard. I frowned. Richard? Who was Richard? The name meant nothing to me, until Sam quietly spoke. Emily, wasn't Richard Collins your father's business partner? My eyes widened. I hadn't heard that name in decades. Richard Collins, Dad's closest friend, the man who disappeared from town just months after Dad died. Suddenly my phone rang. Walter Hughes. I answered immediately. Emily. His voice sounded nervous. I remembered something. What? Your mother wasn't the only person who asked me about that red box. My grip tightened. Who else? A long silence. Then he answered. Richard Collins. The room seemed to stop spinning. He came to my workshop about 15 years ago. He offered me $10,000 if I'd tell him how to open it. What did you tell him? I told him to leave. Walter lowered his voice. Emily, he wasn't looking for money. He kept asking about the map. I looked down at the folded county map lying beside the journal. The same map Mom had left for me. What did he want with the map? Walter whispered something that made every hair on my arms stand up. He said, the map doesn't lead to treasure. It leads to proof. I slowly unfolded the map again. This time, I looked much closer. The red circle wasn't centered on the barn. It was slightly behind it, near an old oak tree that had been struck by lightning years ago. A place no one had dug, not even my brothers. Then I noticed something else. Tiny pencil marks, coordinates, and a sentence so faint I almost missed it. The truth isn't underground. Look up. At that exact moment, a loud crash echoed outside my house. Sam rushed to the front window. His face turned pale. "Emily, they're here." I looked outside. Daniel's SUV sat in our driveway. Behind it, Ryan climbed out carrying a shovel. And standing between them was an older man with gray hair. A man I recognized from the photograph. Richard Collins had come back to Kentucky after 20 years, and he was staring directly at my front door. The knock came 3 times. Slow, heavy, confident. No one knocked like that unless they believed they owned the conversation before it even began. Sam looked at me. "You don't have to answer." But I did. I opened the front door only halfway. Standing there was Richard Collins. He looked 20 years older than the man in my mother's faded photograph. His hair had turned silver. Deep lines crossed his face. But his eyes, they hadn't changed. Cold, calculating. Behind him stood Daniel and Ryan. Neither of them looked at me. They were watching the red journal in my hands. Richard smiled politely. "You must be Emily. I haven't seen you since you were a little girl." I remember. I didn't. Or maybe I had simply forgotten. "What do you want?" I asked. His eyes drifted toward the journal. "I think your mother left you something that belongs to me." My grip tightened. "It belongs to my mother." He smiled again. Not originally. For several long seconds. Nobody spoke. Finally, Richard sighed. "I'd rather not do this on your porch." Sam stepped beside me. "Then don't." Richard ignored him. "Emily, your father and I made an agreement many years ago. Everything your mother kept was never supposed to stay in the family." I stared at him. My mother spent 30 years protecting something. What exactly? His smile disappeared. The truth. Then he turned around and walked back toward his truck. Before climbing inside, he said one sentence over his shoulder. "You have 48 hours before this becomes much bigger than your family." The trucks disappeared down the road, leaving nothing but dust behind. That night, sleep never came. I kept reading Mom's journal, page after page, year after year. At first it spoke about ordinary life, harvests, birthdays, bills. Then, everything changed. One entry from 1998 was underlined 3 times. "Thomas finally knows the truth. Richard lied to him. Now I'm afraid of what Richard might do." I swallowed hard. The next page had been torn out, completely missing. Someone had removed it years ago. The pages around it were ripped jaggedly. Whoever took it hadn't been careful. I turned another page. Mom's handwriting had become shaky. "If anything happens to Thomas, it won't be an accident." My heart stopped. Dad had officially died in a tractor accident. Had he? The next morning, I drove to Harold Benson, the retired sheriff. He was 81 now, living alone beside Cedar Lake. When I showed him the journal, his face changed immediately. I wondered when this would finally come back. "You knew?" He nodded slowly. "I knew pieces." He poured 2 cups of coffee, then sat heavily across from me. "Your father came to my office 3 days before he died." Every muscle in my body tightened. "What did he say?" Harold looked out the window. "He told me someone had been threatening your family." "Who?" He wouldn't give me a name. "He said he needed proof first." "What proof?" Harold looked at the journal. He said, "Margaret already has it." The room fell silent. "So Mom knew everything?" Harold nodded. "I believe she did." "Why didn't she tell anyone?" "Because she was protecting you." I frowned. "Protecting me from what?" Instead of answering, Harold stood. He disappeared into another room. When he returned, he carried an old evidence envelope. "I retired 15 years ago. I wasn't supposed to keep this." Inside was a photograph. The same photograph from Mom's journal. Only this one wasn't cropped. It showed the entire scene. Dad, Mom, Richard, and another man. Someone wearing a sheriff's uniform. I looked closer. The badge read, Deputy Alan Pierce. Harold noticed my confusion. "He disappeared 2 weeks after your father's funeral." On the back of the photograph, someone had written, "3 men know where it happened." Not where it was buried, where it happened. I suddenly realized something. Everyone had spent 30 years searching for buried treasure. But Mom never wrote about treasure. She kept writing about truth. As I drove home, my phone rang. Deputy Mason? His voice sounded urgent. Emily! You need to come to the farmhouse. What happened? We found human remains. The world seemed to stop. What? They were uncovered near the old oak tree behind the barn. My hands nearly slipped from the steering wheel. But my brothers were digging under the barn. They changed locations this morning. Someone told them to. Richard. It had to be Richard. Police lights surrounded the property. Crime scene tape fluttered in the evening wind. Neighbors stood behind barricades whispering. News vans had already arrived. I walked carefully toward Deputy Mason. He removed his hat. The medical examiner can't identify the remains yet. But, he hesitated. There was something buried with them. He handed me a plastic evidence bag. Inside, covered in dirt, was a sheriff's badge. Badge number 214. The name engraved across the front read, Alan Pierce, the deputy who vanished 30 years earlier. My knees weakened. Mom hadn't been protecting hidden money. She'd been protecting the secret of a murder. And somehow, Richard Collins had known exactly where the body was buried. Before anyone else. Which meant he hadn't returned looking for treasure. He'd returned to make sure the truth stayed buried forever. Just then, a black luxury sedan pulled onto the property. Richard stepped out. He looked at the flashing police lights, at the evidence bag, at me. For the first time since I'd seen him, his face turned completely white. Because he realized the secret my mother had protected for 3 decades had finally been uncovered. Richard Collins froze the moment he saw the sheriff's badge inside the evidence bag. For just a second, the confident businessman disappeared. In his place stood an old man who looked terrified. Deputy Mason noticed it too. Sir, I'm going to need you to stay here. Richard forced a smile. Of course. But I saw his hands. They were shaking. The crime scene stayed active until well after midnight. The medical examiner carefully uncovered the rest of the remains. There was no treasure, no gold, no hidden fortune. Only a man who had disappeared almost 30 years earlier. Deputy Alan Pierce. The deputy everyone believed had simply left Kentucky without telling anyone. He never left. Someone had made sure of that. The following morning, every television station in the state carried the story. Missing deputy found buried on Carter Farm after 28 years. Reporters crowded outside the property. Neighbors whispered. My phone never stopped ringing. Then another call came. It was Walter Hughes. Emily, I found something. What? I was cleaning my workshop. I remembered your mother asked me to hide one more thing. My heart skipped. What is it? A cassette tape. I drove straight to Walter's workshop. He handed me a dusty metal box. Inside, an old cassette labeled only July 18th, 1998. Walter looked uneasy. Your mother told me, if anything ever happened to her, I should give this to you. But only after the truth started coming out. My hands trembled. We found an old cassette player in his office. I pressed play. Static filled the room. Then, my father's voice. Clear, calm, alive. Margaret, if you're listening to this, it means I didn't make it home. Every hair on my arm stood up. Dad continued speaking. I finally know why Alan disappeared. I know who buried him. I know who stole the bank money. I stopped breathing. It wasn't Alan. It wasn't our family. It was Richard. Walter covered his mouth. The recording continued. Alan figured it out. He was gathering evidence. Richard caught him. Now Richard knows I know. If anything happens to me, it won't be an accident. The tape clicked. Silence. Neither Walter nor I spoke for almost a minute. My father had recorded his own warning. Days before he died. I immediately called Deputy Mason. Within an hour, state investigators arrived. The cassette became evidence. So did Mom's journals. So did every photograph. The entire case changed overnight. What had begun as an old missing person investigation was now officially reopened as a homicide. That afternoon, Richard Collins was brought in for questioning. At first, he denied everything. Then detectives played my father's recording. Witnesses later told me, Richard's face drained of color. He asked for a lawyer. The interview ended immediately. 2 days later, another surprise arrived. An elderly woman named Helen Pierce knocked on my front door. She carried a faded family photograph. "I'm Alan's widow." I invited her inside. She looked around the room quietly before speaking. "I've waited 28 years for someone to tell me what happened to my husband." Tears filled her eyes. "I never stopped believing he was a good man." I reached across the table and held her hand. "My mother believed that too." Helen smiled sadly. "Margaret visited me once." I looked up. "What?" "About 6 months after Alan disappeared. She couldn't tell me everything, but she promised, one day the truth will come home." She reached into her purse. "I think she wanted you to have this." It was a sealed envelope. Mom's handwriting covered the front. "If Emily ever finds Alan." I opened it carefully. Inside was another letter. "My sweet girl, if you're reading this, then you already know this was never about buried money. Richard spread that rumor himself. As long as everyone searched for treasure, nobody searched for Alan. Your father died because he refused to stay silent. I lived because I pretended to believe the lie. Forgive me for keeping this from you. I wanted you to have a childhood, not a lifetime of fear. Love always." Mom, by the time I finished reading, I couldn't see the page through my tears. 3 weeks later, the grand jury returned indictments. Richard Collins was charged with first-degree murder of Deputy Alan Pierce, conspiracy, obstruction of justice, bank robbery conspiracy, multiple counts of fraud. The courtroom filled with reporters. For the first time, my brothers sat beside me instead of across from me. Neither one spoke much. The arrogance that had brought them back to Kentucky had disappeared. Daniel finally whispered, "We were wrong." Ryan stared at the floor. "We thought Mom was hiding money." I nodded quietly. She was. They looked at me confused. The richest thing she ever protected was the truth. Neither brother could answer. The trial was scheduled for 3 months later. But one question still remained unanswered. If Richard murdered Deputy Allen, what really happened to my father? The answer was waiting inside one final piece of evidence investigators had just discovered: a locked metal toolbox, recovered from the collapsed loft of the old red barn. And according to the lead detective, it had my father's name engraved on the lid. The old metal toolbox sat on a wooden evidence table. Its faded blue paint was chipped. Rust covered the corners. Across the front, barely visible beneath years of dust, were 6 engraved words. "Thomas Carter, keep out." My father had always written his name on every tool he owned. Seeing those familiar letters again made my throat tighten. The detective carefully unlocked the box. Inside, there were no wrenches, no hammers, no farm tools. Instead, there were neatly organized folders, a small cassette recorder, and several rolls of undeveloped camera film. The detective looked at me. "I think your father knew he might not live long enough to tell this story." The film was developed by the state crime lab. When the photographs came back, the room fell silent. Picture after picture showed Richard Collins meeting with 2 masked men behind an abandoned grain warehouse. Another photograph showed Deputy Alan Pierce secretly taking pictures from a distance. The final photograph was blurry. It showed my father standing between Richard and Alan. The date stamped in the corner was 2 days before Dad's fatal tractor accident. The cassette recorder held one final surprise. It wasn't a confession. It was a conversation. Richard's voice. Angry. Threatening. "You should have minded your own business, Tom." My father answered calmly. "I'm not afraid of you anymore." Then, the recording ended with the sound of a truck engine and someone shouting. It wasn't enough to prove exactly how my father died. But combined with everything else, it destroyed Richard's story forever. The prosecution argued that Thomas Carter had uncovered the truth about the robbery and Deputy Pierce's murder and paid for it with his life. Rather than face a lengthy trial with overwhelming evidence, Richard Collins accepted a plea agreement. He admitted responsibility for Deputy Alan Pierce's murder, the cover-up that followed, and his role in the decades-old robbery conspiracy. As part of the agreement, He revealed where the remaining stolen bank money had been hidden. Not under our barn, not anywhere on our farm. It had been concealed inside an abandoned grain silo nearly 40 miles away. The rumor about the Carter farm had been a lie Richard spread himself. While everyone dug in the wrong place, no one looked where the money really was. My mother had known that. She had protected the truth, even when it cost her years of fear and silence. When the case finally ended, reporters crowded outside the courthouse. Microphones stretched toward me. One reporter asked, "Miss Carter, after everything your family has been through, how do you feel today?" I looked toward the courthouse doors, toward the place where justice had finally caught up with the past. Then I answered honestly, "I don't feel like we won. I feel like the truth finally caught its breath." That sentence appeared in newspapers across Kentucky the next morning. Daniel and Ryan stood nearby. For a long time, neither of them spoke. Finally, Daniel walked over. His eyes were red. "I owe you an apology." I stayed quiet. "I came back because I believed there was money." "You came back because there was Mom." He lowered his head. "I don't expect forgiveness." Ryan stepped beside him. "We spent years blaming Mom for things she never did. And we left you to carry everything?" There was no excuse. No dramatic speech. Just two broken men finally telling the truth. I couldn't erase 30 years of disappointment. But I also didn't want Nora to grow up watching hate become another family tradition. So I simply said, if we're going to be a family again, we start with honesty. Nothing more. Nothing less. Months later, the farmhouse felt alive again. The old red barn had been repaired. Fresh paint covered the weathered boards. Children laughed in the pasture. But they weren't my children. Or my brothers. They were children visiting a new community learning center built on part of the property. With the state's approval and support from local donors, we transformed the farm into the Margaret Carter Family Center. It offered after-school programs, grief counseling, and free financial education for single parents and caregivers. Mom had spent her life helping people quietly. Now her kindness had a home. Near the entrance stood two wooden benches beneath a large oak tree. On one bench was a small bronze plaque. It read, "Showing up is the greatest gift you can give. Margaret Carter." Every visitor stopped to read it. Many sat there for a while. Some cried, some smiled. All of them understood. One warm spring afternoon, Sam and I walked across the pasture with our daughter, Lily. She was 7 now. She pointed toward the old barn. "Mom, is that where everyone thought the treasure was?" I smiled. Yes. She looked confused. But there wasn't any treasure. I knelt beside her. "Oh, sweetheart." "There was." She tilted her head. "Where?" I pointed toward the farmhouse, toward the community center, toward the children laughing together. "Right there. The treasure was your grandmother's courage, and the truth she refused to bury." Lily thought about that for a moment. Then she smiled. "I think that's better than gold." "So do I." That evening, after everyone had gone home, I sat alone on the front porch. The same porch where Mom and I had watched countless sunsets together. The same porch where she'd once told me, "The people who love you prove it by showing up." The sky slowly turned orange and purple. A gentle breeze moved through the trees. I opened her old journal one final time. Tucked inside the last page was something I had somehow missed. A tiny handwritten note. Just one sentence. "Emily, don't spend your life digging for what was lost. Build something beautiful with what remains." I smiled through tears. Then I closed the journal forever. Not because I wanted to forget, but because I no longer needed the past to tell me who I was. My mother had already done that. She hadn't left me buried treasure. She hadn't left me millions of dollars. She left me something far more valuable. The courage to stand for the truth, the strength to show up when it mattered, and the wisdom to understand that real family isn't measured by blood, inheritance, or last names. It's measured by who stays when life becomes difficult. As the porch light came on above me, I looked toward the gravel road one last time. For years, I had waited for people who never came. I wasn't waiting anymore. I was finally home. Please like and subscribe to Heartwarming Tales.